Hello and welcome to the Night Watch. Today we are going to discuss the potential origin of the global pandemic known as COVID-19 being, in fact, Wuhan, China at the Institute of Virology. As you may have noticed in the news over the last few days, the headlines are really starting to heat up on pressure from countries such as America and others on Beijing for releasing information, being transparent, and full disclosure, which at this point seems to truly not be happening. Keep in mind that at least 136,000 people around the world have died from the COVID-19 virus so far, and the number is increasing by the second. Almost 31,000 in the US alone, and as you look at countries around the world, the death toll in countries like Italy and Spain and just all over, it's just been an absolute calamity and a disaster. So looking at the responsibility of this, obviously whoever is responsible, which appears to be China, really owes the world full transparency. And at this stage, it appears that that's not happening. At a news conference yesterday, Trump's top diplomat, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, told Fox News Channel after the news conference, "We know this virus originated in Wuhan, China," and noted that the Institute of Virology was only a handful of miles from the market where people first came down with the disease. "We really need the Chinese government to open up and help explain exactly how this virus spread," Pompeo added. "The Chinese government needs to come clean," he said. That's from Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State under Trump in America. Pressure around the world. Lawsuits have been filed. Italy is seeking damages. The state of Florida apparently has filed a lawsuit against China. Now, let's talk about this a little bit. Essentially, we're faced with a situation where, if proven, if countries determine that China is responsible for the virus, and if it in fact began not by accident, but in a laboratory, and it was designed, and it was released either whether it be by carelessness, by negligence, by recklessness, by accident, in any case with the responsibility lying there, and the lack of prompt full disclosure immediately thereafter, the burden of responsibility would truly be an immense weight to carry, but must be, in my opinion, enforced and China held completely accountable for all damages. Just to talk a little bit about China, China has a $13 trillion economy. According to the balance, the U.S. debt to China is just over $1 trillion through January 2020. So a huge amount of debt that America owes China. China has a $13 trillion economy, according to the World Bank as of 2018. America, on the other hand, has a $21 trillion GDP as of 2019 approximately. According to the Harvard Business Review on February 26, 2020, the world owes China more than $5 trillion. That is a huge amount of money. Just to put that into perspective, countries worldwide owed China more than 6% of the entire world's GDP, gross domestic product, in debt as of 2017. So just think about that. 6% of the gross domestic product of the entire world represents a debt owed to China. More than $5 trillion. The world is in debt to China in an immense amount. And the U.S. alone owes China more than $1 trillion. How much is the coronavirus costing the world? Probably more than that. How much is the coronavirus costing the U.S.? I would say definitely much more than that $1 trillion. In my opinion, one possible outcome, as I've reflected over the last 24 hours, what could be the consequence to China if it turns out this virus originated in the Wuhan Institute of Virology and China was not transparent and let this virus spread out of control, not only within their own country, but externally by failing to properly alert the world with the World Health Organization allegations of being China-centric and discouraging the travel restrictions from China, saying that was the wrong way to approach this situation, which in fact should have been done far earlier than it was. If you consider that, just in the greater context of things, there is truly negligence in terms of at least not sounding the alarm. At the very least, the world should have been warned. and we were all owed that much. People have lost loved ones, entire families have been erased off the planet. So many lives have been lost, so many jobs have been lost, so many people and businesses that are just living paycheck to paycheck and on the edge have gone broke and gone under and are struggling right now and not sure where to get money for rent and even food. It's just devastated the world. So what I would say as a possible outcome to what China has done would be, let's erase the debt. There's a huge amount of debt that countries throughout the world owe China. One possible outcome is erase the debt. So essentially, add up the bill, what the cost of the coronavirus was in each country, charge that off against the debt owed to China, and bill China for the difference. And then China would thereby have a debt to each country representing the excess cost of the COVID-19 pandemic to their country. So in fact, we simply would leverage the debt, reverse the debt, assuming that the cost was greater than the debt. Let's say that the US owes China just over $1 trillion. If the cost to the United States is $2 trillion, we would basically bill China $1 trillion. We'd have no more debt to China. China would have a debt to America. Each country would do the same thing. Let's say the cost to a country was $500 billion, and let's say their debt to China was $1 trillion, they would still owe China $500 billion. So that's an example. That is a huge amount of leverage, and I realize there are various processes that would have to go underway for that to happen that would involve various parties such as the World Bank and others. Now, there is a challenge in that China has been very much lacking transparency in the amount of debt that is outstanding and the types of debts and various other elements. But we do know that the debt is massive, and each country certainly knows how much they owe China. And I feel that it would be quite of a simple step to take in terms of recouping the losses by essentially erasing the debt and billing the excess, and then China owes the world money rather than the world owing China money. That is one possible solution. Another possible solution, and I would say in addition to, not instead of, would be simply for consumers, because who knows what politicians will do. Hopefully, if this is proven to be the case, determined to be the case at the very least, politicians will take a firm stand against China moving forward to ensure there's adequate consequences, and consequences that cost China as much as this has cost the world, which the world deserves and which each of you deserve. So if politicians do not take the stand that they should for political reasons or otherwise, consumers have the option to boycott products made in China. Now, that is not easy to do, but the life that we're living now under quarantines and under lockdowns and under social isolations and in fear of dying from a virus that's invisible and losing loved ones and losing so many lives around the world, can we handle boycotting China products? I believe we can, and that would be one possible path that consumers can decide to take, whether or not politicians do. Of course, countries can take a stand and actually impose massive tariffs, even sanctions, etc., and take it to that point. Also, moving factories and businesses out of China. Each country, such as America, can offer incentives and subsidies for American-based companies to move back to America. Other countries can offer incentives and subsidies to move to their countries, such as India. All over the world, countries could offer subsidies and incentives to move companies, to encourage them to move from China to their country and do business there instead. And so many great countries have an infrastructure to support so much growth in their economies and to embrace inbound companies moving from China if this is determined to be the case. So essentially at this point, I believe it is time to level the playing field. China has the world in debt. China has been known to lack transparency for as long as I can remember. Not only that, but with the recent facts that are coming out about the coronavirus origins, it appears more and more convincing that, in fact, the virus started there. And not only that, but there was a lack of prompt disclosure, which would imply recklessness, negligence, and possibly even more. And at the very least, the responsibility to sound the alarm did not happen, which resulted in mass spreading of this virus everywhere at an immense cost. I would be very disappointed if there were no consequence for China based on what has happened. And at the very least, I believe we should charge the costs of this pandemic to each country against the debt owed to China over this global pandemic. Thank you for joining today's episode of The Night Watch.